Is everybody well caffeinated? Are you ready for a nice afternoon session? My name is John Thornton. I'm the creative director for You vs. the Internet, which is a Microsoft game studio. We make Wordament and Snap Attack are our two games out there right now.
I'm Cheyne Mathey-Owens. I'm a software engineer on the team.
And the two of us are going to tell you basically the story of how Wordament came to be a single platform app and then into its life as a multi-platform app. And basically the architecture that we built around that and how we did that. All right, how many of you have played the game Wordament out there? Oh, fantastic. I'm talking to a crowd. How many are like addicted to it and play it more than like once a month, or anybody like really addicted to it? All right, come on up afterwards. I got some shirts and some swag I'll give you. And if you ask a question afterwards, we have some more stuff for you as well. So anybody that's a fan, come on up afterwards. We'll get you some stuff. Okay, for those of you, the couple people that don't know what Wordament is a massively multiplayer online word-finding game where players race for 2 minutes at a time to find the most words in a 4x4 grid of letters. Yes, I have rehearsed that and said that a number of times. So basically, if you've ever played Boggle, it's similar to that, but there's a lot more going on. So the rounds are 2 minutes long. The game plays 24 hours a day. The world's running. And players come in and they can play at any points during the day. But it's thousands of players concurrently. So everybody's playing at the same time, the exact same board, the exact same puzzle. And then after each round, we rank them and see how well they did. And you see, like, I am number 27 out of 2,000 people. And you see exactly how well you came in. We are a international game. We are in 15 different languages. As I mentioned, we work at Microsoft. And so one of the beautiful things about being at Microsoft is we have like 25 years of history of dictionaries and lexicons built into Microsoft Office. So all the spell checkers that you use in Word, it's the exact same stuff we use in our games. It enables us to go to languages that really don't traditionally have word games even in them. So it's pretty awesome where we sit. We're built entirely in C# using the Xamarin platform. And our service is entirely C# on the Azure platform. And we are a 100% ad-funded game. So we make all of our money via those little display ads that you see at the bottom. And lastly, this is the foundation for the new game that we just launched in May. So at the beginning of the summer, we launched Snap Attack, which is our second game. It's similar to Wordament in that it has these fast-paced 2-minute rounds where you try to find as many words as you can, only instead of finding words, you're actually building words in this game. If you like Wordament, check this out. It's really fun. There's really nothing like it out there right now, and so we're pretty excited about this game. All right, so we have two apps. They both share a ton of code together. They're both effectively built on the same platform. We ship those across all the major mobile OSs, and this accounts for about 12 different binaries that we build and support in the various stores today. Actually, it's 13. And how do I get to 13 when there's three platforms, 2 XEs? Well, the reality is, we're in the Kindle store, we're in the Nokia X store, we still support Windows Phone 7 for Wordament because a lot of our players grew up there and that's an important platform for us. So this is a lot of store maintenance, a lot of executables to deal with on a daily basis. And just to give you an idea of the scope of the game, we have about 2 million monthly active users that come in and play the game. We're roughly divided evenly across the major OSs. We obviously are a little heavier on Windows and Windows Phone because that's where we grew up. And we still have a lot of fans sticking with us. There's still a number of Windows Phone 7 users out there that even still play the game. But pretty active user base in a given month. Okay, so how did this all start? I get asked this question a lot. They're like, wait, you're the Wordament guy? Like, what's the story? So back in 2010, when the Windows Phone came out, Steve Ballmer bought everybody phones. And they set up this moonlighting policy, and they said, you can work on whatever you want for our products, and you can keep the money, you can do whatever you want with it, as long as you don't use our equipment, you don't use our time, you don't do it during work hours. And so a number of employees started building apps, and I was one of those, and I shipped a few things, and then I had this idea for Wordament. And I came into work one day and showed one of my friends. I was like, hey, I'm kind of working on this thing. What are you working on? And he was like, that's a really cool idea. Like, you should totally do that. And I was like, do you want to help me? Because I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, I really did not know how to build a service. I had no idea what I was doing. And he was like, yeah, I'd be into that. And so he came along and built the service, and I built the client. And we spent about 6 weeks, and we produced this, which was the very first version of Wordament that we shipped. This is a very minimally viable product approach. There's really not much going on here. There was no sound, but the game worked. Like, the magic of the game was there. You could play, you could post to our leaderboards, you could see where you ranked. And then this funny thing happened. Like, we shipped this, and people started playing it. which I know it sounds crazy, like, but I was so surprised. Like all of a sudden, like all these people were playing it that I didn't know. The first night we stayed up and we watched it go online. This guy named Mark came in. Maybe you're in the room, I don't know. But Mark came in and started playing. We're like, who's Mark? Like he's not one of us, like because it's just been like 3 of us playing it up until then. And it got legs, so it started taking off. People were playing it. We had these meetups where people would, we'd throw out a tweet and say, hey, we're going to play tonight at a bar, and like 100 people would show up and play Wordament with us at a bar in Seattle. And so it was a great time. Like things were just exploding. And then Microsoft took an interest in it. They sent us an email one night. They're like, hey, this is the games group. Like we like what you've done. Would you want to come in and meet with us? But they didn't realize that we were actually employees at Microsoft when that happened. And I believe we're the only acquisition that ever happened from employees that actually were already acquired. Like, so it was a bit of an odd situation. But we figured it all out. We came over, and we built the Xbox Live version of Wordament, which went on a Windows Phone. And then our management was like, well, what do you guys want to do next? And I was like, we want to go cross-platform. And particularly iOS at that time looked like a really attractive place to be. And they were like, okay, which was kind of unusual. Ballmer was still running the company, and we hadn't done anything really on iOS to speak of. But the games group was like, go ahead, because it is kind of silly to have an MMO that you can only play on one device. It's like, what if the Windows phones could only call other Windows phones? That would be kind of a bad marketing move, right? So they were all about it. They're like, go ahead and do it. And they were like, we're going to make this easy for you. Here's some money. Like, we're going to hire a development house to go write the iOS client for you. They're going to port it. What we would like you guys to go do is write some JavaScript for the Windows 8 that's coming out. Like, we really think somebody should go prove that you can build a game on JavaScript. And we're like, okay. And so we were kind of naive. We're like, let's do it. We ported our Windows Phone C# code. We ported it to Windows 8 via JavaScript. We had this company go build a C++ version in iOS that we intended to go ship on Android as well. And we shipped them. And then I had this moment that I can only describe as like a hangover. Like, we woke up and we're like, okay, like let's go add some features. We're like, well, we can't. Like, we're 2 guys, and we have 3 code bases in 3 languages. And frankly, I had just learned JavaScript. I learned JavaScript to go write that port to Windows 8. So like, we didn't know enough to really go do the things that we needed to go do. And so we sat down and we're like, well, what do you really want to have happen here? We're like, well, I really want is one code base that I can build all of my clients out of. I can modify it, I can add features to it, and then just ship it. And we looked at a bunch of game engines at the time, but we had this unique problem. We're a word game, and text is super important to us. Most of the game engines, especially at that time, I think all of them, all the big game engines, were all based in bitmap fonts, which means the fonts get rendered into pixels, and then you can use them in your game, and they're great for menus and stuff like that, but it's really not good to build a game on top of that, in particular for languages like Arabic that we were in, where the script of the language is super important. Like, you just can't get that right in a bitmap font. So that's when we discovered Xamarin. We went to Monospace 2012. I've seen a couple of those t-shirts running around here too. Monkey Space 2012. We saw Miguel talk, and then we're like, this is what we should do. This makes a ton of sense. All right, so you're gonna see this slide come up a couple times throughout our presentation. Cheyne and I sat down, we're like, let's give ourselves report cards. So at the end of 2011, how have we done? Like, what's our cross-platform report card look like? And basically, it's pretty terrible, I think, for 2011. We didn't share code at all. We couldn't add features. Our dev tools were terrible because we were using every dev tool we possibly could, which is terrible for efficiency. We were building just off of whatever computer we had. We didn't even have a build system at this point in time. There were no if-defs because we just wrote more code instead of using if-defs. And we were not prepared to write another app. But we knew where we wanted to be. Like I said, C#. You're in this room. I don't have to explain this to you. It's a great language. You heard John Skeet this morning. Like, this is a great language. So we knew we wanted to write more C#. And our service was in C# too, so that was kind of interesting. If we could all be C# devs, that would be a huge boost in efficiency for our entire team. We knew we wanted to share code. I think this one's pretty self-evident. Like, of course you want to share as much code as you can. That reduces bugs. It's great. And lastly, we really wanted to be working in Visual Studio because we had a license to ReSharper. We really liked Visual Studio. There's a bunch of nice things about it. And these 3 things combined was like the feature set we knew we kind of wanted to get. And it seemed like Xamarin was going to give us all of this, which was great. Another interesting thing at this time was that we got to hire somebody. Actually, we hired a couple people, and Cheyne was one of our first hires. Lucky enough, we stole him from the Windows Word team, the Microsoft Office Word team. And so he came over and had a good eye for architecture and was able to solve some of these problems. We basically said, here's Xamarin. Like, we've prototyped it. This looks really good. Can you take it to the next step? And so he's going to tell you now about what he did. Yep.
So the first thing I want to mention is that C# everywhere is not the same as code sharing. Each platform talks about things like sound and timers and application lifecycle through different APIs and in different namespaces. So you have to buffer your cross-platform code from the platform-specific code, and there's kind of an art to that, which involves using each platform and understanding their APIs. And then the second thing is you have to figure out what to do with view and input. A lot of times it's appropriate to use native interface builders and interface formats. And nowadays you have things like Xamarin Forms that are options. But given our restraints, the fact that we needed to target Windows Phone 7 and that we wanted rich text, we had really only one option, which were native controls on each platform. So we ended up abstracting out the native controls as well, kind of similar to how Xamarin Forms works. But how did we do this? What was the medium that we drew this abstraction line in? Well, we used something called a partial class. Partial is a keyword that indicates that a class can be implemented in multiple places within a namespace. In particular, you can have a class implemented in multiple files, and that's really what we leveraged here. And on the left, you see we have our cross-platform add control. This is how our cross-platform code talks about add controls. It exposes a constructor and a method to refresh. On the right, we have the other side of the partial class, which is existing in a different file, which wraps the native Android implementation of an add control and then the native call to refresh that add control. And this is kind of a contrived example. And then to go to another platform, we just do the same thing. We have a Windows Phone version of the add control that is also a side of the partial class, and it wraps the native Windows Phone APIs. And when we build our Android app, we're consuming the cross-platform and the Android add control. When we build our Windows Phone app, we're consuming the Windows Phone version, the Windows Phone side of the partial class. And along with this, we used a really strongly defined folder hierarchy. We put all of our cross-platform code in a top-level cross-platform folder, and all of our platform-specific code in top-level platform-specific folders. And this means that at any time, we know from a high level where all of our cross-platform code and all of our platform-specific code is. I can go to one of these root directories and count the lines of code under the directory, and I have a good idea of how much code is cross-platform and how much isn't. And then we used something called wildcard syntax within our project files to bring it all together. This XML you see is the content of a CS project file. I don't know if you've ever opened one up. But what you can do is you can manually put this wildcard syntax. And this first line is saying, consume all of my CS files within my current directory, which is my Android directory, because that's where the CS project file lives. And then the second chunk is going up out of that directory down into my cross-platform directory and recursively linking all of the code within that. And when I build my project, it's basically taking both sides of each of my partial classes, slapping them together, and spitting out our app. And one thing that's nice about this is it makes it pretty linear to move from platform to platform. We just create a new project file, throw in our wildcard syntax, build, and we're basically given build errors that are functions we need to implement. And we go and we build the skeleton code and go fill in the code. So I'm going to give you an idea of what this looks like. Can you switch to device 1? So this is our Wordament solution, our old Wordament solution. And you can see it has 4 projects, one for each of the platforms that we target. And first off, this is pretty awesome. I can build, I can deploy, and I can debug each one of these platforms from this one location. So already that's a great win. To change debugging, you set startup project. And when you set a startup project, that's basically saying, this is the project I want to boot when I hit F5 and what I want the debugger to attach to. If I open up one of these projects, Android controls, we see basically these partial classes that I was talking about. And we use this convention where we added the platform as a suffix to the class name. So playable game board is our cross-platform control for our playable game board that you're actually interacting with when you play the game. And this is where all of our input code lives, which is probably the biggest win here, because we do subtle things with input, like you're fingering just over the corner of a tile, should we highlight it, things like that we really don't want to have to write multiple times. But also things like our animation durations, our colors, and our layout all exists in here and talks about views in terms of lower level partial class views that we create. For the playable game board in particular, the Android side is what implements the specific animations. So our cross-platform playable game board is how you play the game. And when you tap the button, we ask the playable game board to rotate itself, and that gets forwarded to the platform-specific side of the house, which then actually does the rotation via Android animation constructs, object animator. And this is awesome. So we have shared code. If I want to change the animation duration of the rotation, I can go into this shared file. I can change the value, and when I rebuild my other projects, they all pick up that change, because this is a shared file. This is a single file that's linked between my multiple projects. So it's another huge win. But things kind of start to fall down as you go real far down this path. References, for example. Visual Studio is awesome. It tells me how many references each class has. But this is really just the amount of references this class has within this project. And this is because Visual Studio doesn't understand that this is the same class as the playable game board in my iOS and Windows Phone apps. It's a single file that's linked to both projects, but Visual Studio doesn't read past that. And then probably even worse is that some of our tools start to break down. If I wanted to refactor this and rename playable game board to something else, within this project, it would be great. It would change this. It would go to my Android version. It would change this name. But it wouldn't go into my other projects and into their platform-specific implementations of playable game board. And I would actually break all my other projects by using a refactoring tool. And you end up doing a lot more manual work than is really necessary to do things like refactoring. Can we switch back? Okay. So, in the end, this was good for a lot of reasons, including the IDE and code sharing. We actually ended up sharing quite a bit of code. About 90% of our code on each platform was shared across the platforms. And we're happy with this number. The platform-specific code, another nice thing about that, on the left, is that we generally only had to write that once and didn't have to modify it, even though we're playing a lot with the shared code. And nowadays, there are things available that would even further shrink that platform-specific code. Once again, things like Xamarin Forms, well, probably half of that code on the left would be replaced by something like Xamarin Forms.
All right, so it's 2012. Time for Cheyne to get his report card.
Yeah.
How did we do?
We share code well, 90%.
I think we did. I felt really good about that. I was able to go add features that I added in one spot in the shared code. Boom, they went everywhere. So that was really good.
Feature agility, like you said. We can make changes in one location, fix a lot of our bugs in one location, and the changes propagate to each of our projects.
Absolutely. DevTools, felt like we still could do some better work there.
Yeah.
Like Visual Studio wasn't quite as...
We have a single IDE, which is awesome, but as I pointed out, some of the tools within the IDE don't work like we'd want them to. So we get a C there. We build intelligently in the way that we have once again, a single IDE that everything can be built and deployed from, and we started using a build server because
that's a big enhancement.
we can. Yeah. If defs are, we still end up using them. There are lots of cases where I don't want to create four platform-specific files for something like a title ID or something that's just kind of heavy-handed. So we ended up peppering quite a bit of if-def platform into our shared code, which is kind of unfortunate, but was probably the appropriate thing to do. And as far as multi-app support, we have a lot of code that we can share with future titles, but it's not modularized and it's not necessarily organized in an appropriate namespace. So we're better across the board.
You pass.
We pass, yeah.
Cool.
We're not totally there. And that's where portable class libraries come into the picture, or pickles, as you've heard Miguel call them. You guys probably know about them, but I'll go over what they are. Portable class library is a project that targets multiple frameworks and can be consumed by projects that target one of those frameworks. For example, I can write a portable class library that targets iOS, Windows, and Android. And within that portable class library, I can use the subset of .NET that is available on all those frameworks. And then when I create my app project, whether it's iOS, Windows, or Android, I can consume it because the PCL targets those frameworks. They build to a single binary, which is also nice. Like that change I made before to modify the animation duration, in the old world, without portable class libraries, I'm rebuilding that for each of my projects. But if that was within a portable class library, I would only have to build that once, and a single assembly would be consumed by my multiple projects. They're simple to create. There's a wizard in Visual Studio. You just check mark the frameworks you're interested in, hit OK, and immediately you have a project that you can consume. And they're hot. They're relatively new. And it's only within the past year that Xamarin and Microsoft have worked together to make Android and iOS targetable by a portable class library. I think it's important to note that they're not dynamic. In other words, when you create a portable class library or when you build it, Visual Studio is not looking into each framework and trying to determine the subset of .NET that is appropriate for you to use. Rather, the frameworks are bundled together into static profiles. And they can be a little bit opaque. Profile 74, for example, is iOS, Android, and Silverlight, and you'd have to look online to actually determine that. And they're not compatible with partial classes, and that's really a limitation on partial classes, which is that they need to be built together within the same assembly. So moving forward with Wordament, what's the battery dead? I think the battery might be dead. Moving forward with Wordament, we definitely want to leverage portable class libraries. They solve a lot of these problems that we were getting seized with. But we already went down this road of partial classes. How do we move to portable classes from where we are? Well, like I mentioned before, the real art of the platform abstraction is finding out what the abstraction is itself, and we've already done that. There's an implicit interface that exists between my cross-platform code and my platform-specific code, and those are those private methods that are exposed through the partial class. So to move to portable class libraries, we move that code, or we move those prototypes into an interface that's within our portable class library, our shared cross-platform code. And then instead of talking to private methods on the current class, we're now talking to methods on an instance of this interface that we keep around. And then we take our platform-specific code and we move it into a class that implements that interface, but all the content of that class is really the same. I haven't had to really modify anything that it does. So that's awesome. There's not a whole lot of work. There wasn't a whole lot of work in doing this. And we're not totally done yet. The cross-platform code still, it doesn't know about any of the implementations of the interface it's talking about. And this is necessary. We don't want this code to have any idea that there even exists something called Android or iOS or Windows Phone. But we have to figure out a way to let it know during runtime that we want an Android ad control or a Windows Phone ad control. So we use something called a service locator pattern to glue it all together. The service locator pattern is at its core really a static dictionary that maps interfaces to implementations. And you use it by, at boot time, binding your implementations to your interfaces. And in this example, we have the Android root activity boot on create. This is when our app boots. And at that time, we say, hey, service locator, register the Android ad control with the iPlatform ad control interface. And now, in our cross-platform code, when we need to go get our platform ad control, we ask the service locator, and it spins up an instance of that interface, of the Android ad control that we use. So how does this look? How has our code evolved from where it was before using partial classes? And I'll show you where our code is now. First off, we actually went a little further than I mentioned. We did pull our cross-platform code into Wordament core, but we also pulled our cross-platform, cross-app code into a core portable class library. And then we also snuck our new title in here, Snap Attack. So now we have kind of at the root, the heart of our apps is the core portable class library, and then the platform-specific abstraction layers that sit next to it. And if I open up core, and I look at something like the timer, whereas this used to be a partial class with platform-specific partial classes that are all built together, now I have an interface that defines what that old implicit interface used to be. And at first glance, and then I implement this interface in each of my abstraction layers. And at first glance, this doesn't seem, a whole lot better. It's a little bit more code to create the same app. But you start to realize that it is a whole lot better, and it's all because Visual Studio now understands how everything's connected. If I look at the references of my platform timer, I see that it's implemented. We implement that interface in Android, in iOS, in Windows, and Windows Phone. So that's a true reference count in our solution. And if I were to refactor this, if I wanted to change start to begin, let's say, it would go into all of my abstraction layers, and every place where that interface is implemented, it would update them all, and none of my projects would break. They would all still work. So this is awesome. We use the core portable class library not only within our Snap Attack and Wordament projects, but also within an ads portable class library that we consume internally and we share with teams within our studios. All of our cross-platform code that talks about things like views and states and input all live within the application's core portable class libraries that then are consumed by the app projects themselves. And the app projects really have a minimal amount of code, which is first to register everything through the service locator pattern, also to connect the view at a high level to the root page of each app, and to connect things like the application lifecycle. But there's a very little bit of code in each of the actual app projects, and none of the code is really app-specific. It's just code that we have to put into each of these to glue everything together. So this is awesome, and still everything builds, everything deploys, everything is debuggable. But I have a single solution that has all of our apps across all of our platforms, and this is a really good place to be. This is where we wanted to be the entire time, but this is only recently possible. You couldn't have the solution like this a year ago. So yeah, that's where our solution is now. Can we switch back?
All right, time for another report card.
Another report card.
This one I think is a little more obvious. So of course the other ones we still get A's on because it's about the same.
Yep.
But the DevTools one, obviously it's a lot better. You can
yeah,
refactor.
all of our tools work. I'm not aware of any tools that fall down. And once again, it's because Visual Studio now understands how all of our projects are interconnected in a way that it didn't before.
And the build thing is really interesting too, right? Because it's actually building binaries.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
yeah. We still have a single solution that we can build everything, but when I make those changes in shared code, I'm only building the appropriate projects. If I made that change to modify the animation duration in the Wordament core portable class library, and I build, I'm going to have to repackage all of my apps, but the only DLL that I'm recompiling is the Wordament core portable class library.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so with ifdefs, which we all hate, at least we did in our studio, like this got a ton better because you can't even do it, right?
Yeah, the portable class libraries aren't even built within a context where a platform makes sense. Like I mentioned, the portable class library necessarily has to know nothing about the platforms. And because it's built once, you can't even if you wanted to, you couldn't use conditional compilation per platform. We still use it for flavors, but we can't really get away with that.
Yeah, there's places where you want it, of course.
Yeah,
but by and large, we're not littering it throughout the code.
There's zero if-def platform code within our portable class libraries.
Excellent. All right, so a little bit of a recap here. Try not to do this. Like, you're probably doing it wrong if you're doing this, which is just building XEs for everything. At least if you're two guys, I don't recommend this approach. Like, find something else to do. You don't want to write your code just for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone separately. This is a better solution. Partial classes are definitely effective. We shipped for years with partial classes as our solution to this. And by no means is this a bad way to go. It solves a bunch of problems for us.
It's code is shared, but another thing is the if-defs. You get these kind of fuzzy corners where you have shared code files, but those files have little chunks of it that are platform specific.
Yeah, I broke the build more than once with this approach, and Cheyne would come in and yell at me. But this is much better, right? If you can get to the point where you're actually building the portable class libraries and you're sharing those, like that's a huge win in terms of efficiency, the tools, like everything we just talked about.
Yeah, all of our cross-platform code, which, like I mentioned, is our view, our states, and our input code, is the bulk of it, exists within a single binary that is built once. And then we have much less code. That 10% you saw on that earlier slide now lives within the class libraries specific for the platforms, which we call abstraction layers, Android abstraction layer. And that's what is the binding of our core classes, our cross-platform classes, and the classes they represent, the APIs they represent on the specific platforms.
Yeah.
And then just
If you want to be a cool kid, you do this. Right? You add your apps.
yeah. And then you take it one step further. And what's cool about this is, we're at a point where new games are almost templated, right? In order to create a new game, we just have to create a new portable class library for that game. We still consume core. We use the same abstraction layer class libraries. And even the app projects themselves is just really copy and pasting code, a minimal amount of code from each
Shane's
app
been
project.
tempted to write a wizard. He's been talking
Yeah.
about it. Just like, new Wordament app. Like, go.
Yeah, and that's certainly within the the possibility of where we are. It wouldn't take too much.
You can take it
energy.
too far though.
You can. Yeah. So thanks for keeping me grounded.
Cool. Awesome. So that's what we really want to talk about today. We have a bunch more resources. If you're interested in how our service works, so we have a huge Azure service. Well, it's not huge, but we have a relatively good-sized Azure service that we run, and we've documented how we built that up on MSDN. The MSDN guys came in and they did a three-part series on Wordament, so it describes the client architecture as well as the service, and there's a bunch of good little nuggets in there. Additionally, Xamarin did a case study on us a while back. It's on the partial class implementation of our clients, but it's definitely a good read if you're interested just in how we build our apps. That's a good read as well. And lastly, if you're watching the video, there were some other talks today that would be great about portable class libraries. In particular, Dan Plaisted, thank you.
Is that it?
He's in here somewhere, right there. His talk's a really good one on how to do portable class libraries, gets into a lot of the nitty gritty.
He actually goes over all of these techniques we used, also partial classes and other methods.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
So I have a stack of t-shirts here. If anybody wants to ask questions, I also have a stack of power bricks, and we have a few minutes and we'll do as many as we can. We'll go right up front here.
Yeah, you didn't mention universal app at all. Is that going to be of any use to you, or because of the way you've done things, is that not going to be
The
any
trouble
use?
in the future, it's going to be useful for us, absolutely. But the trouble right now is we still support Windows Phone 7. So we can have this legacy of stuff that we're just not ready to abandon yet, and so we're not quite ready to jump on that today.
But it would be totally appropriate for that to be one of the platforms that we target. Yeah, and we're definitely moving in that direction.
I also have a ton of stickers. If anyone wants stickers, come on up after the talk. Do you want a power brick or a t-shirt? Power brick. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I have two quick questions. Are you a part of Microsoft because you were acquired? So are
Yeah,
you your own company?
I've been a
but
Microsoft employee the whole time. Back when I worked in Windows, and I just took a new job effectively inside of Microsoft. But we transferred the IP to Microsoft, so Microsoft owns Wordament.
Yes. And this is just so that I can tell my students.
Sure.
What kind of revenue does an application like this generate? If it's
You can figure that out if you go kind of like.
Well, okay,
sniffing
how
around.
many-
Like,
how
I
many
can't give you the exact
downloads?
details on that, but we have
No?
2 million players a month that come in and play.
Okay, that's
Most of our
fair
players
enough.
don't play one game. Like
Yeah.
typically, if you sit down, you're going to play several games.
Okay.
Like you play one, you play 6, and so that's a lot of display ads. You have to push a lot of display ads to make any reasonable amount of money. But we were lucky enough that we're able to do that. Is it more than one comma? Yes. It depends on your time frame, I guess. But
I may have missed this, so pardon me for being redundant, but which Azure technologies are you using?
neither one of us are the service guys, but my understanding of it, do you want to take this?
No, you'd be better.
Okay. We use the platform as a service, is my understanding. I know we do a bunch of stuff with like Blob Store. We have, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Send me an email, I can help you out.
Yeah, or
Go read the article.
The article, yeah.
Yeah, you guys use portable class library. You think you prefer this approach.
Yeah.
Xamarin just released another form of shared code, which is the shared project. So in your mind, you still prefer portable library. So why you think Xamarin releases a new form of shared project?
I don't know if I'm really familiar with shared project. Is that
So
like
shared project is
code
basically a container of source code
Okay. So that's really similar to what we were doing before with our linked files.
with a partial class, right?
Yeah. Well, now we use partial classes, but from my understanding of the shared library, that's really more akin to the linked file approach that we were doing before. And portable class libraries are better for a lot of these reasons that I mentioned. We're building things once. We're forced to move our platform code and if-defs out of it. And they're just, I feel like they're better pretty much across the board. I can't imagine wanting to go back to
Well,
linked
it's
files.
better for you to build a component, you know. If you,
Yeah.
Yeah, but if your own project, you control all the source code. So according to Xamarin, shared project is probably a better approach.
I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know how we could really make our lives any easier by using anything other than portable class libraries right now. It allows us to modularize our code exactly how we'd want to modularize it. Having this solution where everything is separated the way it is into separate DLLs is just totally appropriate.
Well, you have to use use the interface for portable class library.
Yeah,
right?
we have to use an interface.
Yeah, for shared project, you just use the partial class, and it's simpler sometimes.
Yeah, but look, probably the biggest thing is that our development environment doesn't work as well in that world. And those examples I was showing you, if I'm using the partial classes, and I would assume you get these same issues with the shared library project you're talking about, my reference counts aren't necessarily real, and my refactoring tools don't work because, at least the approach we took with the linked files and the partial classes, Visual Studio did not understand that the class in a shared.
That's the primary reason you
That's
prefer.
the primary reason. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And that's a good point because you can look at this code and, like I mentioned, it's more code, and it's the same app. But the benefit is that our tools all work seamlessly across the board.
Yeah, and actually on that same approach, I know
Come get us,
Xamarin is kind of trying to nudge us towards PCL. This is at least I've heard from at least a couple people, so they're kind of saying, this is kind of the way you might want to go. I had some question. I know this is really about code sharing and all that stuff, but I was a little bit curious about some of the graphical stuff that you did, and were you able to encapsulate some of that stuff, and how much code did you end up actually being individually in the?
It's quite a bit of code. That 10% that is platform specific, I'd say like 75% of that is probably view code that's connecting our cross-platform controls to the specific controls. That said, we try to be smart about just doing the atomic level stuff. Like, it's really important that we have images, containers, and labels, and you can actually get pretty far with just those core concepts. Animations are interesting, and we have done some animation abstraction, but complicated animations, we just write that per platform.
Like all of our opening screen animations and stuff you see, that's all just
the reveal and move, but things like fading and simple translation animations, we actually have abstracted that into our cross-platform layer.
Yeah, it's nice. We can take any element and say .fade, and time, and it just goes.
When we write views, we don't have to write much platform-specific code, except for things like animations, complex animations.
A guy from Microsoft was talking about the PCL patterns earlier too, and he mentioned a strategy called bait and switch. And I was wondering if you heard of it, and or did you think it was something that you could use?
I guess I'm not familiar with that particular pattern.
Okay, so
And
the
Daniel,
way
you have that in your presentation, don't you? Do you want to take that one?
there he is.
So I'd just say bait and switch is very advanced and not probably appropriate. Thanks. I'd say bait and switch is a very advanced technique and probably not appropriate for app development. It's really, it's hard to use, but the advantage of it is that as a library developer, I can do all the complicated stuff, so it's very easy to consume my library. But if you're just writing an app, it's probably not worth it at all.
You mentioned using the service locator to, I guess, inject your implementations. I know Xamarin in the keynote yesterday, they showed a different mechanism. Is that something that's new? Do you know, like, it's basically metadata on the...
I'm not familiar with that, but I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And we went with this approach just because it was simple enough and we wrapped our head around it. But you can take that idea and run with it. In Daniel's talk, he talks about something called enlightenment, which goes so far as to use reflection to dynamically determine which platform DLL to consume. So you can imagine going so far as to actually not even having to use a pattern at all and have that logic be within the actual portable class library that you consume. But for us, once again, you know, it's not necessary for us to go much further than we are. I wasn't familiar with that metadata pattern, and if I was, I definitely would have looked at it. I can easily envision how that would work.
And then I was also curious, as far as how complicated in terms of like how much code you had and the time it took, was it to move from your first pattern where you got some C's to your second pattern with the pickles?
So that was relatively fast. Things are, I mean, it's a lot of code moving, and unfortunately, while we're moving that code, we didn't have at our disposal the tools that we wanted to have available, which is why we moved in the first place.
We actually kind of put Shane in a cave on that one. Like all the other devs were off doing other stuff, and we're like, "Go ahead." He really wanted to do it. We're like, "Go ahead."
Yeah.
We actually thought it was gonna take a long time, and you came back. It was like under 2 weeks before you like.
Yeah,
were like,
yeah, a few
have it running,
weeks
have
to
it running.
do the majority of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Big Wordament fan, been playing since Windows Phone 7
Right on.
times, so great work. Hopefully this is redundant. Do you have an idea of how much code you're able to share across each platform, Windows Phone and Android and iOS?
Yeah, about 90%.
Okay.
We had a slide where we mentioned that.
Okay.
It's, yeah, and that number was just taken using that method of going to our cross-platform folder and counting the lines of code underneath it. So it's a little fuzzy. It's not taking into account like all the if-defs, but it's close enough to
Okay.
be.
How many people on your team for the initial Windows Phone 7 build, and how long did it take?
So there's just them two.
was just
for
two
the
of us, yeah.
Initial.
We wrote the very first version in 6 weeks, from idea to shipping, which sounds like really crazy, but it wasn't that much, right? It was a prototype at best. It crashed. It probably only supported about 30, 40 people at a time. Like there were some real problems with it. But again, it was kind of the minimal viable product approach. Like we got something out there, we saw if it was good, and then we really haven't stopped coding on it since. You know, like there's almost every week somebody checks something into Wordament.
One more question. Are there any UI or animation differences on the different platforms that make it easier or more difficult, or you see trends across different platforms, people get higher scores or anything like that?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, from the UI standpoint, since it is a game, we actually want it to look identical everywhere. So we go to great lengths to try and make it look like Wordament everywhere it is. But as far as like what's the highest scoring platform, for a long time it was still like Windows phones were the best. We
have to be fast on each platform. People get over 180 words per round, which is just insane.
If you don't believe that, you can go on YouTube and there's videos, and it's just insane what some people are able to do. Kids even, like there's a 13-year-old kid that was like our #1 player for years, and unbelievable. Like I can't explain it.
Yeah.
No, cheating's a whole nother thing we could talk about, but we actually go through great lengths to try and get cheaters out of the system as well too. We actually let them stay in. They don't know it. They just don't rank. Like so, if you actually may be a cheater and you think you're doing awesome, but nobody else sees you. So.
Yeah, quick question
Yeah,
about
Sorry.
the authentication, you seem to go through Xbox Live and then to your own authentication or user management.
Right.
That is the worst problem with the game, certainly in the UK. Quite often it's the Xbox Live bit fails, but it can still connect fine to your servers. Is that something, is it down to the Xbox Live service that is not performing? Or?
Yeah, I don't want to throw like other teams under the bus, but effectively, yeah, if we can't talk to Xbox Live, typically it's something wrong with that. Unfortunately, sometimes the latency is too long. Like we've introduced issues, like we changed at one point in time the way we serialize stuff to the wire, and we all of a sudden noticed that like people in Africa couldn't play anymore. It was just because the latency was so long, and we had just introduced just enough latency that they could no longer effectively sign into Xbox. So.
Another thing is Xbox Live Sign-In has some constraints on it. Like your date and time have to be right on the device in order to sign into Xbox Live, and we don't necessarily have those constraints on our service. So there's things like that.
We tend to always be up. Like occasionally we've been down, but like we have pretty good uptime, and so typically it's something wrong. And it can be something. This is just the sad state of the world. You can be something wrong with your account that you can't see in our game. So I don't have any way to tell that like you haven't signed the latest EULA or whatever for Xbox. Like I can't tell that when I make the call to Xbox Live, and so it just fails. And then we try to figure out what the problem is. But
So do you get enough value from Xbox Live to make it worth dealing with all these
that's an interesting question in and of itself. I will say yes, because when we shipped on Xbox Live, the game went bazonkers. Like people that never would have played it were like, "Oh, it's an Xbox game." Like, yeah. So that brand is a tremendous value, and yeah,
And gamer score matters a lot to a lot of people.
it's true.
Yeah.
So, did you use MVVM anywhere?
No. No.
I played with it early on in the very first version, but we got off of it. When we went to start to go cross-platform, we started really thinking model view controller, because especially when we were thinking about we were going to port to iOS, we were like, well, that's what we should kind of follow. But yeah, we haven't used MVVM.
Okay.
I'm running out of track of shirts, so just come on up afterwards if you asked a question. I'm actually only on mediums and smalls now too, so.
You said this started as an outside project and then brought it in, which I think is great if companies support that. But did you end up selling outright to Microsoft, or do you have like a revenue sharing deal with them?
Come talk to me after class. If you're interested in how to do that, I don't have a recipe for it, so if there's no like magic sauce. Like I don't think I can bottle that lightning and do it again. Like it was just the right thing at the right time.
So are your main two games Wordament and Snapchat, or do you have more things in the pipeline?
Of course, we're a game studio. We're gonna make more things, but right now that's all we have.
To talk to you.
Right. I think we're about out of time. Let's do one more, and then we'll. If anybody wants to keep talking to, we'll be in the hallway. We're around the conference.
So you guys have a pretty popular game, and you convinced me to install it. So that's
Right
one
on.
guy who didn't raise his hand, and it's on there now. So we saw something at the keynote, the new insights for collecting metrics. Did you guys use anything like that? How did you get feedback, or were you just lucky?
So we're probably doing this wrong too, because we built our own custom BI system. We have so much data on our service; it's really easy to just kind of like effectively grep the logs and figure out what's going on with our users. So we have a ton of BI. We have some beautiful dashboards written in Scythe that you can go and see like what's going on. But yeah, the insight stuff looks hot. Like I think we're gonna go look at that when we get home.
Yeah.
Like it makes a ton of sense.
Okay. Cool.
All right, we're done. So yeah, if anybody wants to keep
Thank you, guys.
talking, just find us.